Bonjour. Good morning. I'd like to say that today, my out-of-comfort zone contribution to our attempt to understand the neural and social basis of syndrome E is the following. It concerns a very specific problem. We had a magnificent talk in the last minutes with a very broad view. My view is going to be much more restricted. It concerns a problem we have not yet really tackled here, which is the transformation of young children, age 9, 10, 8, 9 to adolescence into perpetrators. So I'm going to take the risk of trying to get even out of my competence because I'm not a specialist of child psychology. It is an historical fact that has been going on for a long time. Pol Pot, Hitler, young soldiers, children of war, for example, Uganda, but also in many other places on the planet. And presently, actually, in terrorist activities, because ISIS and these people do recruit very young children and somehow intoxicated them. And so a recent film by Jonathan Little, Wrong Elements, has brought a crucial witness about the Uganda children which were captured by the armed movements and forced to kill. They were involved in the fusion of a terrorist group. The fascinating thing to me is that they became killers and participated to mass killing, and as you know, the same happened in Sierra Leone and in other places. The film reveals the ambiguous attitude of some of these children now in adulthood. They were, as you will see in the film, actually interviewed as adults, who both recognize the horror of their behavior and keep somewhat a good souvenir of the time they participated, as if still today their brain was split, in a sense, into the past, in two views of the past. So it is relevant, I think, also to the problem we have today of these perpetrators, which are both killers and can be home and be good friends and parents. Maybe we can see 2 minutes of this film. So Jonathan Little is actually an anthropologist, and he went for many months in the field and interviewed these guys who had been recruited as teenagers, but they were now 25 or young adults. And he asked them to bring him to the place where they had committed the massacre and discuss with them at length. And you will hear what they say. On a le son. So journalist Coney has launched a movement. You are now a soldier of LRA and you have to accept it. If you do something wrong with the oil of Carita, we will kill everybody in your family. In 25 years, LRA has killed many thousand people. So he said, LRA captured me when I was 13. I went out at 16. Here is my friend Michael. He has also been captured at a very young age. She says, I have been captured at 13 in Sudan, and I was given to Coney, who actually captured many women for his own use. Considered as victims, they try to go back to normal life. And you know maybe the book that Jonathan Little wrote about Les Bienveillants.
I started killing my...
So there are a few pictures in the film concerning these massacres.
So after a while then...
He says, I got used to kill. Killing was not a crime after. So he now takes Jonathan Little. They take Little to the place where they committed the massacre. And they say, this is the way we hid when the helicopter came to fight us. So they find some old weapons. But you see, now look what they said. they said actually at some point a very interesting sentence. They said, it was a difficult life, but very interesting. In fact, it's even worse. They say it was fun. On the very site where they describe the massacre, they say, in a sense, it was very interesting. This is what struck me. I wanted this to show you. So my hypothesis, which is, of course, at risk, is that I propose there is a critical period in the biological sense of critical periods in biology for the acquisition of tolerance and true empathy in this pre-adolescent time. If at this age, that's my proposal, children are intoxicated into a narrow sectarian view of others under a strong group influence, they do not acquire the fundamental capacity to change point of view from egocentric to allocentric or heterocentric perspective, develop cognitive flexibility, evaluate social group, moral, alternative, and meaning about their acts, etc., share emotion, they will become fanatics and be ready durably, if this is really a critical period in the biologic sense, durably eventually kill us, and something will stay for a long time. This is a proposal. Now, in order to eventually try to document this proposal, let me give you just first a few background facts, which are, for me, at least at the background of this hypothesis, and that I have already presented in our previous meetings. And I will just deal very quickly with 3 questions. I will go too fast about this, but I have already had the chance to present it. Sympathy and empathy, spatial reference frames, stereotyped behaviors, which I think have to be considered when one looks at what happens at this crucial age, which I will try to document in the second part of my talk. The difference between sympathy and empathy that we started to discuss yesterday with Giacomo. The German philosophers, many years ago, distinguished 2 fundamental ways to interact with others. Sympathy, Mitfühlung, with to feel, spatial and temporal process by which individual experience the same thing as the other in experiencing and at the same time. Spatial and personal. Empathy, Einfühlung, spatial process by which individuals project mentally themselves in the other's body. So these 2 ideas, we kind of work with them since a small meeting we had in which François Sironi participated actually many years ago concerning these mechanisms. Now, let me just summarize. Sympathy for me, we feel the other's emotions, but we stay in our place. Imitation, emotional contagion, this is a fundamental property. To me, the mirror neuron system is still in this area of interaction, sympathy. It is an absolutely fantastic system, as Giacomo has beautifully shown, which is not trivial because it can detect the intention, the goal of the others. But for me, this is still sympathy. It's a resonance. And there is many, many examples. I have no time to go into that. One example is eye contact, for instance. It's been shown beautifully by Ray Dolan with Nathalie Georges that if I suddenly establish eye contact with one of you, I immediately activate not only the fusiform gyrus, but the amygdala, and therefore all our emotional brain. But for me, this is still sympathy because we still stay in our place. Empathy, we can feel the emotion of others, but from their point of view, we both stay at our place and move our second self to the inside of the self of the other by mechanisms we do not understand, but we are working on. We can feel their emotion, but we can also inhibit them to help. In other words, if you smile at me, but are actually furious and disagree with me, to be empathic with you, I have to inhibit the joyful feeling I have of the fact that you are smiling. Same with the doctor and same. So empathy eventually may include the capacity to inhibit this personal emotion in order to understand the emotion of others. I've been working with Japanese friends for 30 years, and I know that when they are really angry, they smile at me, but they smile in a very special way. And if I want to be empathic, I have to inhibit this joyful feeling. So we actually developed a very particular paradigm, which actually had been mentioned by the German philosophers many years ago, which is the funambule, and I am going to make you make the exercise. I'm sorry, but I'm doing it all over the world. Please put your hands like this, all of you, if you care. And you are going to do like me very quickly, as soon as you can. Quickly. 1, 2, 3. No. I have the right hand down. You stayed in your place. You were activating your mirror neuron system, but you were not putting yourself in the place of BERTHOZ. All right? Thank you. We went to Olaf Blanke in Lausanne, who has done all this beautiful work concerning out-of-body experience, etc. And we did the EEG on this paradigm with a multidisciplinary group, and Bérangère Thiriou, who was initially a philosopher, who became a neuroscientist, who is now in psychiatry. And we recorded the activity of the brain, and particularly what happened in those of you who understood that they were not doing like me, but they were shifting after about 600 to 900 milliseconds. So we developed the paradigm, and we looked at what happens first at this time here, where there is a shift of reference frames that you actually did, a number of you, and we found that there is, at this stage, activation not only of one system, but a number of very interesting systems, distinction between self and others, recognition of oneself in the mirror, the human mirror system, of course, etc. So what we call an empathic process, and probably empathy will be in plural in the future. You know, you can buy now an empathic dishwasher, and everybody says autism is empathy, schizophrenia. So we think we have to work on that like we worked on with attention and memory. There are many processes. We also could, with EEG, see what happens when the subject viewing the funambule first activates all the visual areas, and after 500 milliseconds shifts. It's not submitted, it's actually published in 2014. Shift between these two potential attitudes and ways of interaction with the other. And we produced this schema. This is what you did, many of you here, which is reflection symmetry, and this is what happens when you adopt a change in point of view. And we also have data on schizophrenic patients where we showed in a subgroup of them that they could not do these changes, etc. Now, we are speaking about space. Therefore, we also have to take into consideration in these children the problem of the manipulation of spatial space, because what I've been talking about is changing points of views, space. And we know that we have many cognitive strategies for that. We can be egocentric view of the world, which is typically actually sympathy. We can also be allocentric, forget about our body, have a cartographic view. We can also take the other as a reference, which Jean-Denis de Gauss and Anne-Catherine Bachot-Lévy and a number of people have called the heterocentric point of view. So we can adopt many spatial reference frames, and there is now an enormous literature, as you know, from the international community concerning the neural basis of these cognitive strategies from London, from everywhere. We know it takes some time to shift from one to the other. We have shown that with virtual reality experiments in which we ask people to do egocentric travel in a city, and then we ask questions relating different places requiring transformation into a map, and it takes time. So mental processes are necessary to change the point of view. We also have a number of Fmri studies for that. For instance, the one I like is the palace experiment, in which we have people in the palace here. We have 3 objects in this palace, and we only show to the subject in the Fmri a small view of the palace and ask 4 questions concerning these dust bins. We ask which is closer to you. I ask you, you will probably say the green one, the green one, and the green one. This is a body egocentric reference frame calculation. We ask the subject which is closer to the ball. This is a relative thing. The most important is which is closest to the largest walls of the palace. But because we only see a small view, the subject has to change reference frame. As if I ask you, is this screen parallel to l'Avenue des Champs-Élysées? You have to change reference frame. So with Fmri, we've shown that different networks were activated for these different strategies. I have no time to go into this. We also have, I put this slide for Giacomo. We have also, with our friends in Grenoble, some years ago already, went to epileptic patients which had these electrodes very deep in the brain. All this is published, of course, and we could record in their brain the physiology of what happens in this shifting of reference frame. And for instance, in the parahippocampus, which is involved in views, we could show that when we ask the subject to change reference frame, which is what happened to you in your brain when I ask you, is this screen parallel to l'Avenue des Champs-Élysées? Or eventually, when you had to change from this to this is the point, you see this long-lasting gamma band activity in the parahippocampus. So we can now do the physiology and show that these changes of reference frames, which are involved, I believe, in social interaction and the acquisition of tolerance and the point of view of the other, are actually very dynamic processes in which there is competition between many structures. We also show that schizophrenic patients had this difficulty. We also have shown that there is a lateralization that was done with the group of Neil Burgess and Laurent Direct in Paris, using her clever virtual reality 5-arm maze. We showed that the left hippocampus area is more involved in the sequential description of the strategies of our movement in space, together probably with language. And the right hippocampus is more involved in the allocentric. So there is also this necessity, probably, of an interplay between the 2 brains. You see how dynamic all this has to be. We also have designed paradigms to understand what happens if you put somebody in the virtual world and have to change point of view, adopting the view of the other. And we have, with neurologists, showed that epileptic patients with hippocampal lesion had difficulties to change these points of view. And we have even more complex studies in which we have published, also done in Fmri with Neil, and in where we have combined everything, changing point of view on objects with avatars and in environment. So we have a background which indicates to us that eventually, in addition, there is sex differences on which we could go back, if you like, in the discussion. The third small recall I want to make, where Itzhak wanted me to mention that because he mentioned it in his initial talk, is the role of basal ganglia. We tried to invite Anne Bill to this meeting repetitively, but she could not come. And because I think that in these kids, it's surprising how fast eventually they say they acquire the habit. It is interesting to relate what I'm going to say about children to these fact that basal ganglia and basal ganglia thalamocortical loops are involved in these in early stages of extreme habit formation, which are, she wrote, steps that are not readily reversible. Anne has shown that this basal ganglia role is not only involved in the acquisition of this habit, but eventually they are hard, therefore, to return to. So that's the introduction. Now, question, can these neural findings help us to understand the development of empathy and social relation and eventually support this idea of a critical period, about 7 to 10 years, for the acquisition of perspective change? Piaget already told us many years ago that it is only at 7 and 8 years old that the child can acquire the ability to change point of view, l'expérience des trois montagnes. Now, I'm going very quickly to review for you what I have understood of the evolution. We had in this institute Philippe Rochat 2 years ago, who spent a long time here. He has beautiful data about that. Let me review what I got out. From 1 year to 4 years, we see the child, and this is a model already quite old, but interesting in the graphical description. The child can acquire the capacity not only to understand his own history, understand that there is a history in the world which is independent from his history, and understand that there are two distinct histories. But the question, we also know that after 1 year of age, and this was the data and the work of Jean-Denis de Gauss on la désignation. After 1 year of age already, the child can not only point to something, but can designate. So it can show to somebody. You, so this is the triad, I, you, and me. So very early, the child can acquire this capacity to somehow start changing references. And we have a paper actually in adults with Laurent Cléret de Lagavant and Anne-Catherine Bachot-Lévy on what is not a pointing task, but what was a designation task. The person was in the fMRI, and he had to designate a target to somebody, not only point to it. Now, we also know that after 3 years, the child can construct a future self in which he is involved. And there are very beautiful fMRI data on here, like this paper of Attente. We also know that at 4 years, children can extend their self towards their own future, but also start thinking about the future of another person. And they wrote, the child at this age can now imagine the future choice situation for the extended self of another person. We also know from Philippe Rochat that after 5 years, he says he thinks the child is a critical period for acquiring ethical thinking. But his project here in the IAA was very interesting because he proposed to say that at the same age, the child can also acquire la méchanceté, wickedness, because to be bad and to be wicked supposes that eventually you understand what happens in the other, not only what happens to you. We also know that the child has to wait until 7 to 13 years to develop semantic memory. And probably it is also an age at which children have to be able to relate their own self to space. And I'm going to go very quickly on this complex slide, but I remind you that Penfield, many years ago, showed that in this part of the brain, there was a construction of the body scheme, awareness of body scheme, self, and spatial relationships. Relation between myself and space. And we had data with Grenoble, France, which show that it's all along the SCS that you can have by epileptic, by stimulation, all these effects of out-of-body experience, etc., which have also been documented very beautifully by Olaf Blanke in relation with autoscopy, eotoscopy, out-of-body experience. So this area of the brain is deeply involved in the relation between the self, body self, and space and the relation with others. And I was interested some years ago by the fact that Monica Zilbovicius published a paper in which he showed in autistic children a hypoactivity in this area. And I thought that eventually, if you cannot relate your own body with space, with the others, how are you going to communicate with the others? How are you going to start developing what I call true empathic processes? Now, I'll go very quickly now on a few data we have obtained recently by collaboration with psychologists concerning this particular time. You understand that what I am trying to push is that there is this very interesting, important basic time between 7 years and maybe pre-adolescence, where the child is acquiring not only ethical values, but this ability to be cognitively flexible and take the point of view of the others. And that is why my idea that if at this age you intoxicate the child and put him in only one narrow view, which is what has been done by Hitler with the young, the young people that he threw at the war at the very end, which has been done by Pol Pot, which is presently done by the terrorists. Eventually, you prevent the child to acquire this ability to understand the others. So what do we know? Well, we have a paper with Nicolas Poirel and Olivier Audet on a variation of an old Piaget task, which we have done in virtual reality, which was a distance evaluation task, which can be done in allocentric or egocentric perspective. And we show that between 5 and 12 years old, there is a dramatic decrease of the errors which are made concerning which is the longest. Piaget did that with matches on the table. And the question here is, which is the longest path, okay? Now, the errors decrease drastically, indicating the acquisition at this range of age of the ability to manipulate allocentric information. We also have a paper and a study which was done with Jesse Bullens, a specialist of children in Holland, using the 5-arm maze of Kinga, of Laurent Direg, which allowed us to look at allocentric and egocentric strategies in navigation. And the conclusion here is even very young children, as I already mentioned, can adopt an allocentric strategy after 4 years, but this becomes more efficient and more sophisticated after 10 years. So there is really a crucial period of integration at this age, which is my interest. We also know that in order to inhibit eventually an egocentric narrow view about the others and the world, you have to use inhibition if you want to develop a more flexible view of the world. And I like to quote this work by Olivier Audet here concerning a logical task with a perceptive view. The subject looks at some forms, and he has to make a logical task. At the beginning, in the adult, but also in the young child, they did the fMRI. What you see is the activation of the parietal cortex. The task is made with a perceptive system, and people make logical errors, decisions. Later on, when they learn, both the young people age and in the adults, so you see the appearance of the frontal and prefrontal areas that we have heard so much about in the last days, although it's completely empty here. There is a shift from the parietal cortex to the prefrontal cortex and the inhibition of the perceptive task. So in order to start being flexible, one has to inhibit the primitive or the automatically acquired strategies. We have other studies. We have a recent paper with a group of Audet. How am I doing with 2 minutes. Long minutes? Okay. We have papers concerning inhibition, which show that in order to adopt this third-person perspective, it requires inhibitory control. And I have also a number of paradigms that we are now developing with our colleagues in pedopsychiatry, Michel Bodbol, David Cohen, and in PISA to explore this capacity of children to change point of view. Some are done on the ground. This is the magic carpet, which is a task in which the child has to look at a number of targets on the ground and eventually repeat a trajectory from different points of view. It has been actually used for assessing in different types of disorders in adults, but also in children. And we have now, from 6 to 12 years, a development of this ability to make this spatial transformation. We have also another paradigm for children, which is the funambule, which is the exercise I ask you to do kindly, which is done with salpêtrière on autistic children. And we have only preliminary results here, but this is going to be published. And we also see a crucial change at this area of 10 to 12 years. And finally, I have also had the privilege to have a young artist, Maurice Wehrmann from Leipzig, who came to me and and he had a double mirror. In this double mirror, I can see myself, or I can see you, or by a flicker of light or a change in intensity, I can slowly see me a little bit more and more, and suddenly I see BERTHOZ instead of you. In other words, I can little by little have the feeling that I am now in the other's place. And this paradigm is being used in Brest by Michel Bodbol for autistic children, in Siena. It has been used for schizophrenic people in Rennes. And we are trying to use this paradigm for the study of self-other interaction in young children and in pathology. And we already have a paper concerning this question. So this is only the beginning, because to try to understand this, we have to develop new paradigms. And this takes time. And if the critical period for acquisition of the plurality of point of view could be confirmed, we have to allow children with disabilities to acquire this capacity. We have to protect children from those who want to transform them into fanatics and perpetrators. We have to design methods to help them to get out of this terrible habit, as François Sironi has already done. Merci beaucoup.